Savannah Pierce, 29, never imagined she'd be standing in her childhood home again, watching her parents' faces crumble as they realized who she had become. The same parents who had called her the ugly disappointment at her high school graduation party and disowned her that very night. The same parents who now needed a financial miracle, and she was the only one who could provide it. Revenge wasn't her plan, but karma had other ideas. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family revenge drama resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories of karma and healing. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this family betrayal unfolds. Sometimes the most painful lessons come from those who are supposed to love us unconditionally. My high school graduation should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, it became the night that shattered my world and redefined my understanding of family. I remember every detail with painful clarity. The royal blue graduation gown that I'd carefully steamed the night before, the gold honor cords draped around my shoulders, signifying my 4 gigapascals, and the acceptance letter from Stanford University tucked safely in my purse. Despite my academic achievements, I couldn't shake the nervousness churning in my stomach as we drove home for the small celebration my parents had planned. You see, I wasn't what you'd call conventionally beautiful. I had severe acne that scarred my cheeks, I was 30 pounds overweight, and my fashion sense was practically non-existent. In a small town like Oak Ridge, Connecticut, where appearance seemed to matter more than character, I had always been the odd one out. My parents, Elizabeth and Richard Pierce, were both attractive, successful people who valued image above all else. My mother was a former beauty pageant contestant turned real estate mogul, and my father was a plastic surgeon with a thriving practice. Having a daughter who didn't match their aesthetic standards had always been a source of barely concealed disappointment. When we arrived home after the ceremony, there was a small gathering of family, friends, and relatives. As I walked through the door, I overheard my mother speaking to my aunt in the kitchen. "I don't know where we went wrong with Savannah," she sighed, not realizing I was within earshot. "Such a smart girl, but so unfortunate looking. No boy will ever look twice at her unless she gets some serious work done. Richard has offered multiple times, but she's so stubborn." I froze, my graduation cap still in my hands. Before I could retreat, my father's voice joined the conversation. "It's embarrassing, honestly. All the other doctors' daughters are these beautiful, poised young women, and then there's our Savannah, the ugly duckling who never turned into a swan." They laughed, the sound cutting through me like glass. "At least she got into Stanford," my aunt offered weakly. "Fat lot of good that will do her social life," my mother replied. "She'll be the ugly valedictorian just like in high school." I must have made a sound, a gasp or a sob, because they suddenly turned and saw me standing there. My mother's face registered shock, then quickly morphed into a defensive anger. "Savannah, it's rude to eavesdrop. It's rude to call your daughter ugly on her graduation day," I countered, my voice shaking with fury and hurt. What happened next still seems surreal. Instead of apologizing, my parents doubled down. My father straightened his shoulders and said, "Well, it's the truth, isn't it? We've spent years trying to help you improve your appearance, but you refuse. Do you know how it reflects on us?" "On you," I echoed, disbelief coloring my words. "This day isn't about you. It's about my achievement, my hard work." "Achievement isn't everything, Savannah," my mother said coldly. "In the real world, people judge you on appearance first. We're just being realistic." The party guests had fallen silent awkwardly, witnessing this family implosion. My cousin Mia looked horrified while my uncle stared fixedly at his shoes. No one came to my defense. Through tears, I announced that I would be leaving not just the party but their home. My father's face reddened with anger. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to pay for Stanford. We're not wasting money on someone who disrespects us this way." "Disrespects you," I was shouting, now years of pent-up hurt pouring out. You've disrespected me my entire life, making me feel worthless because I don't fit your shallow standards of beauty." My mother's next words sealed my fate. "Then maybe you shouldn't be our daughter anymore. We've given you everything, and all you've given us is embarrassment." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, something broke inside me, and simultaneously something hardened. I looked at these two people who had brought me into the world, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and saw only strangers. "Fine," I said quietly. "Consider me gone." I walked upstairs, packed a single suitcase, emptied my modest savings account passbook from my desk drawer, and walked out of that house without looking back. My parents didn't try to stop me. None of the party guests intervened. As I stood on the sidewalk outside my childhood home, I realized I was truly alone in the world at 18 years old, with $3,427 to my name, and a Stanford acceptance I could no longer afford. I spent that night in a cheap motel, crying until I had no tears left. Then, as the sun rose, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would build myself from scratch. I would become someone so successful, so accomplished, that my parents would regret the day they threw me away like garbage. Not for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind, but to prove to myself that I was worthy, with or without their approval. Little did I know then how dramatically my life would transform, or that 11 years later, I would find myself standing in that same house, facing the parents who had broken my heart, holding in my hands the power to either save or destroy them. The morning after graduation, I woke up in that dingy motel room with swollen eyes and a hollowness in my chest where my heart used to be. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I was homeless, virtually penniless compared to what Stanford would cost, and completely alone. The dream I had worked toward for 4 years, becoming a biomedical engineer, seemed to evaporate overnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the spotted mirror across the room. My mother's words echoed in my mind, "The ugly valedictorian." I touched my acne-scarred cheeks, pinched the roll of fat at my waist, and for a moment I almost believed them. Maybe I was unlovable. Maybe I didn't deserve good things. But then something shifted inside me. A spark of defiance ignited. I may not have been beautiful by their standards, but I was brilliant. I had graduated at the top of my class, despite being bullied and despite having parents who undermined my self-esteem at every turn. That had to count for something. I called Stanford's financial aid office that morning and explained my situation in clinical detached terms. "My parents have disowned me. I have no financial support. Is there any way I can still attend?" The sympathetic counselor on the other end offered me a package of loans, work study, and a partial scholarship, but it still left a gap of almost $20,000 per year that I had no way of filling. With a heavy heart, I deferred my admission for a year, hoping to work and save enough to make it happen. I took a bus to New York City, where I had a distant cousin who reluctantly let me crash on her couch in Brooklyn, "Just until you get on your feet." Melissa was 5 years older than me and worked as a graphic designer for a small tech startup. She wasn't thrilled about having a teenage roommate, but she had enough family loyalty to not turn me away completely. "You can stay for 3 months," she told me firmly. "That's it. And you need to find a job like yesterday." I found 2 jobs within a week, morning shifts at a coffee shop near Union Square and evening work at a bookstore in Brooklyn. Between the two, I was working 16-hour days, coming home only to shower and collapse into exhausted sleep on Melissa's second-hand IKEA sofa. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account earmarked for Stanford. One evening at the bookstore, I was shelving new arrivals in the computer science section when a title caught my eye: Coding Bootcamp, From Zero to Hero in 12 Weeks. I flipped through it during my break, fascinated by the idea that I could learn a lucrative skill in just 3 months. The starting salaries mentioned in the book, $70,000 to $100,000 for junior developers made my $9.50 hourly wage seem pitiful in comparison. That night I used Melissa's laptop to research coding boot camps in NYC. They were expensive, $15,000 to $20,000 for the reputable ones. But many offered income share agreements where you paid nothing up front and instead gave them a percentage of your salary after you landed a job. It seemed almost too good to be true. The next day, I visited Flatiron School in Manhattan during my break between jobs. The energy in the space was electric, people of all ages and backgrounds, hunched over laptops, building websites and apps from scratch. An admissions counselor named Javed took the time to explain the program to me. It's intense, he warned. 60 hours a week minimum. Most students can't work during the program. I can't afford not to work, I told him honestly. He studied me thoughtfully. We do have a part-time online option. It takes longer, 24 weeks instead of 12, but you could keep at least one of your jobs. I applied that day, throwing myself into the pre-work assignments with a fervor born of desperation. When I was accepted a month later, I quit the coffee shop but kept the bookstore job, working weekends and 2 evenings a week. The rest of my time was consumed by coding. It was the hardest 6 months of my life. I averaged 4 hours of sleep a night. My acne worsened from stress. I lost weight, but not in a healthy way. I simply forgot to eat most days. Melissa's 3-month deadline came and went, but seeing how hard I was working, she reluctantly extended my stay. You're barely even here anyway, she reasoned. The coding boot camp was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was judged solely on what my mind could create, not how I looked. In the digital world, nobody cared about my acne, scars, or my weight. They cared about my logic, my problem-solving ability, my creativity. I thrived in ways I never had before, even as valedictorian. 2 weeks before graduation, our cohort hosted a demo day where tech companies came to scout new talent. I presented a healthcare scheduling application I'd built, which used algorithms to optimize patient flow and reduce wait times. It was inspired by the inefficiencies I'd observed in my father's plastic surgery practice over the years. After my presentation, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Diane Fleming, CTO of Meditech Solutions, a rapidly growing healthcare software company. That scheduling algorithm is impressive, she said. Where did you learn to think that way? I was planning to study biomedical engineering at Stanford before circumstances changed, I explained. Their loss, Diane replied with a shrug. We're looking for people who can bridge the gap between healthcare and technology, someone who understands both worlds. She handed me her card. We should talk. 2 days later, I was sitting in Meditech's sleek Midtown office interviewing for a junior developer position. By the end of the week, I had an offer letter, $85,000 per year, plus benefits, stock options, and a $10,000 signing bonus. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, especially at 19 years old. Stanford suddenly seemed like a detour rather than a destination. Why spend 4 years and go into massive debt when I could start my career now? I called the university and officially declined my deferred admission. Then I signed Meditech's offer letter, found a tiny studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, and bought my first professional wardrobe. Simple, well-fitting clothes that made me feel competent rather than trying to make me look beautiful. On my first day at Meditech, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the ugly duckling my parents had labeled me. I saw a survivor. A woman who had lost everything and built herself back up through sheer determination. My appearance hadn't changed much. I still had acne scars. I was still overweight, but the way I carried myself had transformed completely. As I walked into that office building, head held high, I made myself a promise: this was just the beginning. I would never again let anyone else define my worth, and I would build a life so extraordinary that one day, those who had thrown me away would realize exactly what they had lost. What I didn't know then was how quickly that life would take shape, or that in just a few years, I would create something that would revolutionize the medical industry and inadvertently set the stage for the most unexpected family reunion imaginable. The next 3 years at Meditech Solutions were transformative. I immersed myself completely in my work, volunteering for the most challenging projects and consistently staying late to learn from senior developers. My background knowledge and biomedical concepts gained from years of preparing for Stanford gave me a unique perspective that my purely tech-focused colleagues lacked. I could speak the language of both developers and healthcare professionals, bridging communication gaps that had previously stalled projects. Diane Fleming, who had initially hired me, became my mentor. She was a powerhouse in the tech industry, brilliant, no-nonsense, and uncompromising in her standards. Under her guidance, I evolved from a junior developer into a product manager, within 18 months, the fastest promotion in company history. "You have something rare," Savannah Diane told me during my performance review. "You don't just solve problems, you anticipate them. And you understand what healthcare providers actually need, not just what they say they need." By the time I turned 22, I was leading a team of developers working on Meditech's flagship product, a comprehensive hospital management system. My salary had doubled, I had moved to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, and I had started addressing my physical health with the same determination I'd applied to my career. I found a dermatologist who prescribed an aggressive treatment regimen for my acne scars. I hired a personal trainer and nutritionist not to become skinny but to become strong and healthy. I discovered that regular exercise helped manage my stress and improved my sleep, which in turn enhanced my mental clarity at work. When I looked in the mirror, I still wasn't the conventional beauty my parents had wanted, but I was becoming someone I respected, someone whose outside was beginning to reflect the strength I felt inside. The pivotal moment in my career came during a conference in Boston where I was representing Meditech at a healthcare innovation panel. After my presentation on predictive analytics in patient care, I was approached by Dr. Marcus Chen, a renowned cardiologist and medical technology investor. "Your understanding of both clinical workflows and data infrastructure is impressive," he said, handing me his card. "I'd like to discuss a project I'm considering funding." 2 weeks later, I met Dr. Chen at his office in Manhattan. He explained that he was assembling a team to develop a revolutionary diagnostic platform that would use artificial intelligence to analyze patient data and identify disease patterns earlier than human physicians could. "The technology exists," he explained, "but no one has successfully integrated it into a system that doctors will actually use. That's where you come in." The opportunity was too exciting to pass up. With Dr. Chen's backing, I left Meditech to co-found Prometheus Medical AI. I was 23 years old, serving as the chief product officer of a startup with $15 million in seed funding. Our core team consisted of just 5 people, 2 AI specialists, a physician informaticist, Dr. Chen, and myself. For the next 2 years, we worked relentlessly developing and refining our platform. There were countless setbacks, algorithms that failed in real-world testing, interface designs that confused medical staff, regulatory hurdles that seemed insurmountable. There were nights I slept under my desk, weeks where I barely saw sunlight, and moments where I questioned everything. But we persevered. By the time I turned 25, Prometheus had launched its beta product in 3 major hospital systems, with promising early results. Our AI had correctly flagged early signs of sepsis in patients an average of 6 hours before clinical symptoms became apparent, potentially saving hundreds of lives. The medical community took notice and investments poured in. Our Series B funding round raised $78 million, valuing the company at over $300 million. As Prometheus grew, so did my public profile. I was featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 Inches Healthcare, gave a TED Talk on the future of AI in medicine, and was profiled in several major publications. One particular article in Business Insider dubbed me the unlikely tech prodigy transforming healthcare. The piece detailed my journey from homeless teenager to healthcare tech innovator, including a brief mention of being disowned by my parents, a detail I had reluctantly shared during the interview. The article went viral in tech and healthcare circles. Suddenly, I wasn't just known for my work, I was known for my story. Young women in STEM reached out to me for mentorship. Universities invited me to give commencement speeches. A book agent contacted me about writing a memoir. It was surreal and overwhelming. I had never sought fame or recognition, I had simply been trying to survive to prove my worth to myself. Now strangers were calling me an inspiration. Through it all, I never heard from my parents. Not when I appeared in Forbes. Not when I gave my TED Talk. Not when my face was splashed across business magazines. I told myself I didn't care, that I had moved on, that their approval no longer mattered. Most days, I even believed it. By 27, I was a millionaire many times over on paper. Prometheus had expanded to serve hospital systems across the country, saving thousands of lives and reducing healthcare costs by millions. We were preparing for an IPO that would value the company at over $2 billion. My personal stake would be worth approximately $200 million. I had everything I had ever worked for: professional success, beyond my wildest dreams, financial security, respect from my peers, and even a growing sense of peace with my appearance. The acne scars had faded significantly with treatment. My body was strong and capable. I had learned to dress in a way that flattered my figure and projected confidence. I would never be a conventional beauty queen like my mother, but I had grown comfortable in my own skin. The only thing missing was family. I had friends, of course, brilliant, supportive people I had met through work and other channels. I had Diane, who had remained a mentor even after I left Meditech. I dated occasionally, though. My schedule made sustaining relationships difficult. But there was no one who had known me before, no one who shared my history or my DNA. Sometimes in quiet moments between meetings, or late at night in my Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park, a purchase I had allowed myself after our Series B funding, I would wonder about my parents. What were they doing? Did they ever think about me? Did they regret what they had done? I had deliberately avoided looking them up online, afraid of what emotions might surface. But as the date of our IPO approached, an event that would certainly generate enough press to reach them, I found myself increasingly curious. One night, after a particularly grueling board meeting, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and typed Dr. Richard Pierce, Connecticut into the search bar. What I discovered would change everything once again. The search results loaded, and I felt a strange tightness in my chest as my father's practice website appeared at the top of the list. The site looked outdated, with a design that hadn't been updated since I left home. I clicked through the pages, scanning for information about how his practice was doing. The Meet Our Staff page showed fewer employees than I remembered, and the before and after gallery hadn't been updated in over 2 years. Curious, I dug deeper. A local news article from 8 months ago caught my attention: prominent plastic surgeon facing malpractice lawsuit. My heart raced as I clicked the link. The article detailed how a patient had suffered severe complications after a routine procedure performed by my father. The patient claimed that Dr. Pierce had been visibly distracted during pre-op consultations and had made critical errors during surgery. Further searches revealed more troubling information. There were 3 additional malpractice suits filed in the past 2 years. My father's medical license had been placed under review. The practice that had once been the crown jewel of Connecticut cosmetic surgery was now struggling to survive. I searched for my mother next. Elizabeth Pierce's real estate profile showed her still working at the same high-end agency, but her sales numbers had plummeted. Property records indicated that my parents had taken out a second mortgage on their home 2 years ago, and public tax liens suggested they were in significant financial trouble. What had happened to the perfect successful couple who had deemed me too ugly and embarrassing to be their daughter, the people who had everything except a physically attractive child? I was still processing this information when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Chen's name. "Savannah, have you been watching the news?" he asked without preamble. "No, I've been researching something personal." "What's going on?" Medicorp just announced a competing AI diagnostic system. Their stock jumped 15% today, and our potential IPO underwriters are getting nervous. Medicorp was the largest healthcare technology company in the country, a behemoth with resources we couldn't match. If they were entering our space, our IPO could be in jeopardy. "Send me everything you have on their system," I said immediately, shifting into crisis mode. "I'll be at the office in 30 minutes. The next 2 weeks were a blur of emergency meetings, competitive analyses, and strategy sessions. I worked around the clock, barely sleeping or eating, determined to save the company I had helped build. Our team discovered that Medicorp's system, while impressive on paper, had fundamental flaws in its approach to clinical integration, the very problem Prometheus had solved. We accelerated our timeline, publishing peer-reviewed studies demonstrating our superior results and launching a targeted outreach campaign to our hospital partners. Gradually, the market panic subsided. Our IPO was delayed but not derailed. Through this crisis, the discovery about my parents lingered in the back of my mind. During a rare moment of downtime, I found myself looking at flights to Connecticut. Something pulled at me, not sympathy exactly but curiosity, a need for closure perhaps. Before I could talk myself out of it, I booked a ticket for the following weekend. I told no one at Prometheus about my plans, claiming I needed a personal day to recover from our recent crisis. As the plane landed in Hartford, anxiety twisted in my stomach. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? I rented a car and drove the familiar route to Oak Ridge, watching the landscapes of my childhood pass by the window. Everything looked smaller, somehow less significant than in my memories. I drove past my old high school, the coffee shop where I'd studied for AP exams, and finally my parents' house. I parked across the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. The property looked neglected, the once immaculate lawn was overgrown in patches, the trim needed painting, and one of the shutters hung askew. As I sat there debating whether to approach the house, the front door opened. My mother emerged, and I nearly gasped at the sight of her. Elizabeth Pierce had always been meticulous about her appearance, but the woman I saw looked a decade older than her actual age. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted and styled, was dull and carelessly pulled back. She wore no makeup, and her clothing, a simple sweater and jeans, lacked the designer labels she had once insisted upon. She didn't notice me as she collected the mail and went back inside. The glimpse was brief, but it told me volumes about how much had changed. I drove to a nearby hotel and checked in, still uncertain what I planned to do. That evening, I searched local news sources for more information about my parents' situation. A recent article in the Oak Ridge Gazette provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. My father's troubles had begun 3 years ago, when he started drinking heavily following personal difficulties. His drinking had affected his surgical performance, leading to the malpractice suits. The medical board had placed him on probation, requiring him to complete a substance abuse program and practice under supervision. My mother's real estate business had suffered both from the local economic downturn and from the social stigma of my father's professional disgrace. The article didn't mention me, but the timeline aligned with the publication of my Business Insider profile. Had seeing my success triggered my father's downward spiral? The thought was both disturbing and, I had to admit, somewhat satisfying in a dark way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my hotel room, torn between conflicting impulses. Part of me wanted to leave Connecticut immediately, to return to my successful life in New York, and forget I had ever looked them up. They had discarded me when I didn't meet their standards. Why should I care about their problems now? But another part of me, the part that had once desperately craved their approval, wanted them to see me, to witness firsthand what they had thrown away. Not just my success, but the person I had become despite them, not because of them. By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront them, not for reconciliation, but for resolution. To close this chapter of my life definitively, before moving forward with the IPO and whatever came next, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation, applied subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked my features, and drove back to the house where I had grown up. Each mile felt like traveling back in time, yet I was returning as a completely different person than the one who had left. I parked in the driveway this time, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. My finger hovered over the doorbell for a long moment before I pressed it. The sound echoed through the house, followed by slow footsteps approaching the door. It opened to reveal my father, and I barely managed to hide my shock at his appearance. Richard Pierce had once been handsome in a polished patrician way, the very image of successful doctor. The man before me was gaunt with sunken eyes and a sallow complexion. His formerly thick hair was thinning and gray. He stared at me blankly for a moment before recognition dawned in his eyes. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Hello, Father," I replied, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "May I come in? We have a lot to discuss." The look on his face, shock mingled with what might have been shame, told me that he had indeed seen the articles about me, that he knew exactly who and what I had become in the years since they had cast me out. As he stepped back to let me enter my childhood home, I realized that the moment I had both dreaded and secretly anticipated for 11 years was finally here. I wonder, have you ever had to confront someone who deeply hurt you, only to find them in a completely different place than when they caused the pain? It's a strange feeling walking this line between old wounds and new realities. And speaking of new perspectives, before I continue with what happened inside that house, I'd love to know if you've ever experienced a moment where family betrayal led to unexpected strength in your own life. Drop your thoughts in the comments while I take you to the moment of truth in my family's living room. Like this video if you've ever had to rise from rock bottom. And subscribe if you want to see how this confrontation unfolds. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't the revenge itself, but standing face to face with those who never thought you'd stand tall at all. The interior of the house was as neglected as the exterior. The once pristine living room was cluttered, with magazines scattered across the coffee table and a thin layer of dust on the bookshelves. Family photos still lined the walls, but I noticed immediately that all pictures of me had been removed, as if they had erased my existence when I walked out the door 11 years ago. "Elizabeth," my father called out, his voice unsteady. "You need to come downstairs." "What is it, Richard? I'm trying to work on the—" My mother's voice cut off abruptly as she appeared at the top of the stairs and saw me standing in the foyer. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" "Hello, Mother," I said, maintaining the calm professional demeanor that had become my armor in the business world. "It's been a long time." She descended the stairs slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. Unlike my father, who seemed diminished by the years, my mother's posture was still rigid with pride, despite her unkempt appearance. "What are you doing here?" she asked, wariness evident in her tone. "I thought it was time we talked," I replied. "I've recently learned about your situation." My father gestured awkwardly toward the living room. "Perhaps we should sit down." We moved into the room where I had overheard them calling me ugly on my graduation night. The memory was still vivid, but it no longer had the power to wound me as it once had. We sat in an uncomfortable triangle, my parents on the sofa, me in an armchair across from them. "You look different," my mother said, her eyes cataloging the changes in my appearance. 11 years is a long time, I replied neutrally, though I couldn't help noticing the irony. They had disowned me, partly because of how I looked, and now they were confronted with a version of me that, while not transformed into a beauty queen, had grown into a polished, confident woman. "We've seen the articles," my father said abruptly. "About your company, the AI thing." He cleared his throat. "Congratulations." The words were stilted as if he were addressing a stranger. In many ways, I was a stranger to him now. "Thank you," I said. "Prometheus has been quite successful." An uncomfortable silence fell. There were 11 years of absence between us, an ocean of unspoken words. I waited, curious to see if they would acknowledge what they had done, if they would apologize without prompting. They didn't. Finally, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "I understand you're having financial difficulties." My mother flinched. My father's face flushed with embarrassment. "How did you—" "It's public record," I interrupted. "The malpractice suits, the second mortgage, the tax liens. I did my research before coming here." "So you've come to gloat," my mother said bitterly. "To rub our noses in your success while we're struggling." The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it revealed how little they understood me even now. "No," I said firmly, "that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" my father asked, and for the first time I heard genuine curiosity in his voice. I took a deep breath. I needed to understand. All these years I've built my life trying to prove something to myself, to the world, maybe even to you. Before I take my next step, I needed to know if it was worth it. If you ever regretted what you did. My mother looked away, but my father held my gaze. "The drinking started after that Business Insider article," he admitted quietly. "Seeing what you'd accomplished without us, despite us, it was like looking in a mirror and hating what I saw. I'd thrown away my own daughter because she didn't fit my shallow definition of success." He swallowed hard. "Yes, Savannah, I regret it every day." His candor surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even continued criticism. The admission of regret was disarming. "The first surgery mistake happened a week after the article," he continued. "I was distracted thinking about you. Wondering what might have been if we'd supported you instead of." He trailed off, unable to name what they had done. Instead of disowning me for how I looked, I finished for him. "You can say it, that's what happened." My mother finally spoke, her voice tight. "We were wrong, terribly wrong, but you have to understand, we were raised to believe that appearance was everything. My mother put me in beauty pageants from the age of 4. Your father's practice was built on making people beautiful by society's standards. We were trapped in our own shallow values." "That doesn't excuse what you did to your own child," I said, surprised by how calm I remained. "No, it doesn't," my father agreed. "Nothing could excuse that." Another silence fell, this one weighted with acknowledgement rather than avoidance. I studied my parents' faces, searching for the intimidating figures who had dominated my childhood. Instead, I saw two aging, flawed humans who had made a devastating mistake and were living with the consequences. "The IPO is next month," I said finally. "Prometheus will go public at a valuation of approximately $2.3 billion. My stake is about 9%. They exchanged glances, clearly wondering why I was sharing this information. "When we last saw each other," I continued, "you threatened to withhold my Stanford tuition because I disrespected you. As it turns out, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to find my own path." My mother winced at the reminder. "Savannah, I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because I needed to see you face to face before I made a decision." "What decision?" my father asked. I leaned forward, meeting their eyes directly. I could buy out your debts. I could save your house, pay off the malpractice settlements, give you enough to start over. Or, I could walk away and let you face the consequences of your actions just as I had to face life alone at 18. The shock on their faces was palpable. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked as though he might collapse. "Why would you help us?" he asked hoarsely. After what we did, it was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly on the flight to Connecticut. The answer had come to me only this morning, as I sat in my hotel room looking at old photographs I'd kept hidden away for years. "Because I don't want to be defined by bitterness," I said simply. "I don't want the story of my life to be about proving you wrong or getting revenge. I've built something meaningful, something that helps people. That matters more than settling old scores." My mother began to sob openly now. "We don't deserve your help, Savannah." "No," I agreed. "You don't. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about who I choose to be." I reached into my bag and pulled out a document my lawyer had prepared. "This is a loan agreement. I'll pay off your debts and provide a monthly stipend for 2 years, enough time for you to rebuild. You'll repay me at a reasonable interest rate once you're back on your feet." I slid the paper across the coffee table. "It's a business arrangement, not a reconciliation." My father stared at the document, then at me. "You're not giving us charity, you're offering us dignity." I nodded. It was exactly what I had been denied 11 years ago, the dignity of support, without conditions of worth, not tied to appearance or status. "I'll need your answer by tomorrow," I said, standing. "I'm flying back to New York in the afternoon." As I turned to leave, my mother called out, "Savannah, wait." She approached me hesitantly, her arms slightly extended as if she wanted to embrace me but didn't dare. "We destroyed our relationship with you. We know that. But is there any chance that someday we might be part of your life again, not as the parents who failed you, but as people who have learned from their terrible mistakes?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I had never seen in her eyes before: humility. The Elizabeth Pierce, who had dismissed me as her ugly disappointment, would never have asked such a question, would never have acknowledged such fault. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Trust once broken isn't easily rebuilt. But I'm not closing that door completely." I handed her my business card. "This has my personal number. After the loan papers are signed, if you want to attempt a new relationship, one based on mutual respect, you can call me." I left then, walking out of that house with a straight back and dry eyes. The weight I had carried for 11 years, the burden of their rejection, the desperate need to prove my worth, began to lift with each step. I had faced my deepest fear, and discovered that the people who once had the power to destroy me no longer held that power. As I drove away from Oak Ridge, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness. Just a quiet certainty that I had become exactly who I needed to be, not to please my parents, not to prove them wrong, but to honor the resilient spirit that had carried me through my darkest hours. The IPO was a month away. A new chapter of my life was about to begin. And for the first time, I was entering it unburdened by the past, free to define success on my own terms. 1 month after my visit to Connecticut, I stood on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, watching as Prometheus Medical AI went public. The opening bell rang, and our stock immediately jumped 45% above the offering price. By closing, my personal net worth had increased to over $250 million on paper. Dr. Chen squeezed my shoulder as we watched the numbers climb on the big board. "Not bad for a company started by a college dropout and an overworked cardiologist," he joked. The celebration afterward was surreal, champagne flowing freely, congratulations from investors and partners. My picture splashed across financial news networks. I smiled for the cameras and gave the appropriate quotes about healthcare innovation and patient outcomes, but my mind kept drifting back to that living room in Connecticut. My parents had signed the loan agreement the day after my visit. The terms were generous but businesslike. I would pay off their debts totaling just over $1.2 million, and provide a monthly stipend of $8,000 for 2 years. In return, they would repay the full amount plus 3% interest over 10 years once they regained financial stability. There were no strings attached regarding personal reconciliation. That remained entirely separate from the financial arrangement. 3 weeks after the IPO, as the media frenzy began to subside, my phone rang with a Connecticut number I recognized. I answered it while looking out over the Manhattan skyline from my office. "Savannah." My mother's voice was tentative. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, it's fine," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt hearing her voice. "How are things better?" she said. "Your father has been sober for 2 months now. He's working with a younger surgeon who's supervising his practice. The medical board seems satisfied with his progress." She paused. "The house doesn't have a foreclosure notice on the door anymore. That's because of you." "I'm glad things are improving," I said neutrally. "Savannah," she began, then stopped. I could hear her taking a deep breath. "I've been seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand the toxic values I internalized from my own mother and passed on to you. It doesn't excuse what we did, but I'm trying to become someone different, someone better." It was more self-awareness than I had ever heard from Elizabeth Pierce. "That's good," I said, meaning it. "Change is possible. I've certainly changed." "Yes," she agreed softly. "You've become extraordinary, not because of us, but despite us." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. It was awkward and halting, full of careful phrases and unspoken history, but it was a beginning. We agreed to speak again in 2 weeks, no promises beyond that. Over the next 6 months, these calls became regular. Sometimes my father joined, sometimes not. We spoke about superficial things at first: the weather, my work, local news in Oak Ridge. Gradually, we began to touch on deeper subjects. They shared stories from my childhood, that I had forgotten, moments of connection that had been overshadowed by the painful ending. I told them about the struggles of my early days in New York, the challenges of building Prometheus, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied success. 8 months after the IPO, I agreed to meet them for dinner when I was in Boston for a healthcare conference. We met at a quiet restaurant halfway between Boston and Oak Ridge. The 3 hours we spent together were nothing like the confrontation in their living room. There were difficult moments, certainly, but also unexpected laughter, genuine interest in each other's lives, and the tentative foundation of something new. As we were finishing dessert, my father said something that stayed with me long afterward. "You know, Savannah, I spent my career changing how people looked on the outside. You've built your career changing how the medical system looks at people, seeing patterns and possibilities that were invisible before. You've accomplished something far more meaningful than I ever did." It wasn't an explicit apology for prioritizing appearance over substance, but the recognition was clear in his eyes. My mother added, "We're not asking to be your parents again. We lost that privilege. But we'd like to be in your life in whatever capacity you're comfortable with." I considered their words carefully before responding. "I'm not the same person who left Oak Ridge 11 years ago. I don't need parents in the traditional sense. But I might be open to building a relationship as adults who share some history and might find value in knowing each other now." It was the most I could offer honestly, and they accepted it with gratitude rather than entitlement, another sign of how much had changed. As Prometheus continued to grow, expanding internationally, and developing new applications for our AI platform, I found myself gradually healing from wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. The drive that had propelled me forward, the desperate need to prove my worth, transformed into something healthier, a genuine desire to create technology that saved lives and improved healthcare. My personal life evolved as well. The workaholism that had defined my 20s eased as I learned to value connections outside of work. I developed real friendships, began dating with greater openness, and even adopted a rescue dog named Einstein, who became my loyal companion. 2 years after the IPO, I established the Pierce Foundation, dedicating $50 million to supporting young people who had been rejected or abandoned by their families. The foundation provided scholarships, housing assistance, mental health resources, and mentorship to help them build lives of dignity and purpose. My parents attended the foundation launch event, not as featured guests, but as quiet supporters in the audience. At the reception afterward, a young woman approached me, clutching my memoir, Redefining Value, which had been published the previous year. "Your story changed my life," she said, her voice breaking. "My parents kicked me out when I came out to them. I was sleeping in my car and ready to give up when I read about how you started over with nothing. Now I'm in nursing school and I just got my first apartment." She hugged the book to her chest. "Thank you for showing me it's possible to build a life even when the people who should love you don't." As I embraced her, I caught my mother's eye across the room. She was watching us, tears streaming down her face, a complex mix of emotions evident in her expression: regret for her own actions, pride in what I had become, and perhaps understanding at last of the true damage that conditional love inflicts. That evening, as we said goodbye, she pressed something into my hand, a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's," she explained. "She was the one person in my family who valued me for my mind, not my appearance. I think she would have been proud of you." Inside was an antique silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photo of myself at graduation, the last picture taken before everything fell apart, next to a recent photo from the cover of my book. Past and present pain and healing captured in a single object. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. As I prepared to leave, my father asked hesitantly, "Will you be coming to Connecticut for Christmas this year?" It was the first such invitation, carefully offered without pressure. "I'm not sure yet," I replied honestly. "But I'll let you know. The relationship we were building wasn't perfect or complete. There were still difficult conversations, moments of tension when old patterns threatened to resurface, times when the past cast long shadows over our interactions. But there was also growth, accountability, and the slow cultivation of mutual respect. What had begun as a story of rejection and revenge had evolved into something more nuanced and ultimately more satisfying, a journey of self-creation, resilience, and the complicated grace of forgiving without forgetting." 11 years after being called the ugly high school graduate and thrown away by the people who should have loved me unconditionally, I had built not just a successful company but a meaningful life. And perhaps most surprisingly, I had found a way to include my flawed, changing parents in that life, not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I had become secure enough in my own worth to offer compassion without compromising my boundaries. As I boarded my private jet back to New York that night, I realized that the true revenge against those who undervalue you isn't proving them wrong. It's living so fully and authentically that their opinion becomes irrelevant. And sometimes, if you're fortunate, it's watching them grow enough to recognize their own mistake. Today marks 5 years since Prometheus went public. 5 years since I began the complicated process of redefining my relationship with my parents. I'm writing this from my office in our global headquarters, with a view of Central Park in full autumn splendor. Our AI platform now serves hospitals in 28 countries, with peer-reviewed studies confirming that it has helped save over 5,000 lives. The technology we pioneered has become the industry standard, transforming how physicians diagnose and treat patients worldwide. My personal life has flourished alongside my professional success. 2 years ago, I married Daniel, a pediatric surgeon I met through the foundation work. He loves me for exactly who I am: brilliant mind, complicated history, faded acne scars and all. We're expecting our first child in spring, a daughter we plan to raise with unconditional love and the freedom to define her own worth beyond any physical attribute. My parents have continued their own journey of growth and amends. My father, now fully sober for 5 years, volunteers counseling other physicians struggling with substance abuse. My mother has become an advocate for body positivity, speaking to parent groups about the damage caused by imposing rigid beauty standards on children. We see each other several times a year, not as the perfect family I once craved, but as flawed humans who are trying in our different ways to heal old wounds and create something better. The loan I provided them was fully repaid last year, 2 years ahead of schedule. When I received the final payment, I donated the entire amount to an organization supporting homeless teens, a gesture that felt like closing one circle and opening another. If there's a lesson in my story, it's not that success is the best revenge, though that narrative certainly shaped my early motivation. The real lesson is that your value was never determined by those who rejected you, and your healing doesn't depend on their recognition of their mistakes. Though when that recognition comes, it can provide a particular kind of closure. True transformation happens when you stop trying to prove your worth to others and begin the harder work of recognizing it yourself. When you use your own painful experiences, not as a reason to become bitter, but as motivation to create something that helps others facing similar struggles. When you realize that the family that matters most is the one you choose and build through love and mutual respect, whether or not it includes those who share your DNA. The journey from that devastating graduation night to where I stand today wasn't linear or simple. There were moments of despair, fury, vindication, and eventually a peace I never thought possible. The scared, heartbroken 18-year-old who left home with nothing but a suitcase and wounded pride could never have imagined the life I now lead, not just the material success, but the emotional richness, the sense of purpose, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from rebuilding yourself from scratch. So if you're watching this and feeling undervalued, rejected, or defined by others' limited perception of you, know this: their vision doesn't determine your destination. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. What about you? Has someone's rejection ever become the catalyst for your greatest growth? I'd love to hear your stories of transformation in the comments below. If my journey from family rejection to finding my own path resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about overcoming obstacles and creating meaningful change. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and rediscovery. Remember, sometimes the family karma that matters most isn't about getting even, it's about getting free.